Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology on a Monday. I wanted to briefly cover the news about Archbishop Fernandez clarifying his old book. Um, so there has been an outrage here, of course, because Archbishop Fernandez has been selected by Pope Francis to be the head of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. And a lot of people were really concerned given that he authored a book a while back that certainly had some interesting things in them. And there was, again, a whole lot of outrage online um, about this selection in light of this book. And so, what the Archbishop does is he actually comes out and responds, not for the sake of defending himself, but more for the sake of defending Pope Francis, because as he notes, he's been dealing with these allegations and attacks over this book for years. But he decides to come out now and clarify some things because it is then reflecting poorly on Pope Francis. And I actually appreciated his clarification. And so I wanted to share it with y'all because I thought it was interesting. I'm not sure that it entirely gets one off the hook for everything in it, but I do think that it helps bring some more context to it. At the very least, because again, a lot of people are just kind of left scratching their head with, why would the Archbishop have written this book? It seems kind of odd. And that book is a book about kissing, what's been dubbed his kissing book, um, which is entitled Heal Me with Your Mouth, the Art of Kissing. And if you're not familiar with scripture, you will probably be wondering, why would he name it that? But if you are a student of scripture, and you're especially a student of the church fathers, you'll immediately know why he labeled it that or titled it that. And it has to do with the Song of Songs, which he'll explain here. Which, when I first saw this, I automatically knew where the title came from, because again, if you have studied scripture and also patristic commentaries on scripture, you would get it. You would understand. That doesn't necessarily exonerate everything in the book, but you would kind of you wouldn't be left scratching your head as to the title. And I think a lot of people were confused even just by the title. Heal Me with Your Mouth, the Art of Kissing, written by an archbishop. Well, again, I don't think that they have really studied the Song of Songs or the patristic interpretation of it, which, as I said, he'll talk about here in a moment. So let's maybe cover the good, bad, and the ugly. After 2 days of online attacks and ridicule, this is, by the way, from where Peter is. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. After 2 days of online attacks and ridicule over his 1995 book, Heal Me with Your Mouth, The Art of Kissing, Archbishop Victor Emmanuel Tucho, or Tuco, I don't know how they pronounce that in Spanish or Italian or whatever that is, but Fernandez has decided to respond. Appointed Saturday to be the prefect of the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith and the Archbishop of La Plata, Argentina, was once again pelted with online ridicule over a it's a funny way to put it, with ridicule over a book he wrote when he was a young priest serving young people in a parish. That I didn't know. I didn't know kind of the context behind it. He posted a response in Spanish on his Facebook page. Until now, he had refrained from publicly responding to the criticism. I mean, if you recall, this came up years ago, back when the Synod on the Family, I think, was happening, Amor Laetitia, if I recall correctly, way back in the day. I say way back in the day, relatively. This came up then, and he didn't defend himself then, but now he's defending himself because people are using that to smear Pope Francis, which is a common theme that we see today. People calling themselves Catholics, just constantly berating and smearing Pope Francis and turning it into a living in some cases. Until now, he had refrained from publicly responding to the criticism, but he wrote that he decided to respond because people were really criticizing him in order to attack Pope Francis, which is true. That's the only reason why it's even being brought up right now, it's to attack Pope Francis and his decision here. Over at his site, The City and the World, Pedro Gabriel addressed the erroneous translation of the poem, because I've been seeing this poem coming back, into social media. It's making its rounds again. And it, in one of the translations, it's pretty controversial. Relatively speaking, I do find it odd because it has some profanity in there, and yet the same people who are enraged by this are, oddly enough, the same ones who defended the profanity in the Padre Pio movie recently. I just find that to be a little hypocritical, but whatever. So here's an English translation of the Archbishop's post on the book, Heal Me With Your Mouth. Dear friends, I am heartily grateful for the greetings and prayers of so many of you who have written to me through this medium, by email and by different means, in addition to the telephone calls. I have been overwhelmed for almost 3 days by so much affection from my brothers and sisters. On the other hand, there are also groups opposed to Francis who are enraged and who go so far as to use unethical means to harm me. Well, that does sound familiar. Definitely seen that before. For example, for years they have been referring to a little book of mine that no longer exists, which spoke about the kiss. I was inspired by a phrase from the time of the fathers of the church that said that the incarnation was like a kiss from God to humanity. Again, I immediately knew what he was talking about. Just by looking at the title, I already knew that that's what he was referring to. But in case you're not familiar with scripture very well, he's referring to Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 1, the very beginning of Song of Songs, also known as the Song of Solomon. And there are various translations of it. Maybe I'll just read this one to you instead of the one that I have here in the Glossa Ordinaria, and then I'll talk about that just briefly. This one is, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. This is chapter 1, verse 2. I apologize for verse 2. So let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. And that's where the title of the book is coming from. And again, the patristic literature and even the medieval literature sees Song of Songs, chapter 1, especially this verse 2, as pointing to the incarnation. And they do this by way of allegory. And what I would highly recommend to you is get this book, the Glossa Ordinaria on the Song of Songs. If you're not familiar with the Glossa Ordinaria, you should be. You should be. And it's sad that many people aren't. The Glossa Ordinaria, if you will, was the medieval study Bible, if you want to call it that. Again, used by the medieval church with compilation of commentary from church fathers and also some medieval figures, depending on how you date these time periods. And so it's kind of a synthesis, especially of the patristic witness, to commentaries on scripture. And they have this for every book of the Bible. Not all of it has been translated into English. My favorite, however, is the commentary on Ruth. But this one is the Song of Songs, which I've also read. And, if you, again, look through the church fathers, they see over and over this concept of the kiss here as the incarnation, again, because they're reading it by way of typology. But if you read the Song of Songs just kind of literally, not with allegory, not with typology, there are some aspects that will seem profane. There are some aspects that will seem crude. That's, in fact, why Muslim apologists will often use the Song of Songs to flog Christians and say, look, this can't be scripture because look at how profane it is in its content and in its subject matter. And what they're often missing is the typology and allegory involved in these things, although I don't agree that somehow what they would consider profane matter somehow takes away from the inspiration behind it. That's a whole nother issue. But I do encourage you to maybe look further into that. And so again, when I saw the title, I knew that's where he's coming from. And here he confirms that. But I'll tell you this, and that's not necessarily defending everything in his book, but I will say this. There are some things, as I said in the last stream where I talked about Fernandez, there's some things in the Song of Songs that, again, might be more profane than some things that you'll find in his book. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to use this as a standard to critique him, just remember, wait, you also need to then critique your own scriptures with that same standard, which in my opinion is not a good argument if you then have to critique scripture, right? Not a good argument. Let's not do that. All right, so let's continue. He says, I was inspired by a phrase from the time of the fathers of the church that said that the incarnation was like a kiss from God to humanity. At that time, I was very young. I was a parish priest. I didn't know that when he wrote it, and I was trying to reach out to young people. Okay, that's a noble motivation. He says, then it occurred to me to write a catechesis for teenagers based on the meaning of the kiss. Okay, fair enough. I'm not sure this was the best way to do it. I mean, it seems like the intentions were good. Not so sure if this is how I would have gone about doing it. But at least that kind of makes more sense. Like, okay, why would an archbishop write a book about kissing and intimacy, and the intimacy of a kiss? Well, that makes a little bit more sense. He's trying to reach young people. Okay, fair enough. Again, might there be better ways to do it? Yeah, probably so. I wrote this catechesis with the participation of a group of young people who contributed ideas, phrases, and poems. So some of the content in there wasn't even written by him. It was more written by other individuals who have experienced these actions, kisses, and they write poems about them. So this was not based on his experience, and he does make that very clear in the book. Well, what these extreme groups do is say, look at the low quality of this theologian, look at the nonsense he wrote about, look at the low ability he has. They have been ridiculing me for years with quotes from that book. Reminds me again of Muslim apologists and how they use the Song of Songs to bash Christians. It's there is an analogy there. But a catechesis for teenagers is not a book of theology. There is a great difference in literary genre. A catechesis of a parish priest for teenagers cannot be asked to be a manual of theology. Fair enough. I just question the wisdom of even just a priest writing a book about kisses and intimacy and stuff like that. I do question the wisdom behind that. And I am proud to have been that young parish priest who tried to reach out to everyone using the most diverse languages. Again, fair enough. I might critique the execution, but I admire and applaud the intention. I certainly want to reach people, young people, old people. I want to reach everybody. So I admire that intention. That is why when the Pope speaks of my curriculum vitae, he mentions that I was the dean of the Faculty of Theology, but at the same time says I was a pastor of Santa Teresita. For him, it is important for a theologian to get down in the mud and try to use a simple language that reaches everyone. And I appreciate that. I detest theologians who speak with all kinds of technical language and terms that nobody can understand, and they do so in popular circles. Now, I totally understand using technical language in closed circles, especially in academia. I get that. There's actually utility for them. But I'll see some of these guys do that on just social media, and it's just like, clearly your target audience is not going to understand you. I have to honestly and sincerely question whether you really are trying to communicate with people or if you're just trying to show off. It looks like one is just being pedantic at the end of the day. So I try to avoid, if I'm going to use technical terms, I'll usually define them as I use them. So you'll notice I'll often use the term magisterium, and I'll often qualify what I mean by that, and I'll say teaching authority. So if I use these, high technical language in theology, I'll usually use it with defined terms. Like, I'll define these terms in order to help people understand the terms, in case they're not familiar with it. And then you kind of get the best of both worlds. You communicate with everyone, and then you also are elevating them and teaching them theology. Okay. So I can't appreciate that. He says, I've also written books at higher levels. I've written several articles in the magazine Angelicum and the Nouvelle Revue Theologique. For example, texts that perhaps few understand, but the task of the theologian is not limited to these texts. Sure. We're still, since these attacks come from Catholics in the United States and they do not know Spanish, they mistranslate one of the poems in the book. They translate the word bruja, witch, as Puta, which is the B word in English. But the book says bruja. I guess that's how you pronounce it. I don't think there's a J in Spanish. So I think it's pronounced as a Y. So bruja. Uh, Now I'm thinking brouhaha. But anyways, they have no right to change my words. It seems they have no ethics for this, and it's not the first time they have done it to me. Well, again, a lot of people in this group, this is certainly not their most grievous errors, and they've certainly done way worse than this. But yeah, changing people's words, that's certainly common in some of these circles. Anyways, they will continue to say many things, and they will ally with whomever they can in order to attack Francis for having named me. But those who have known me closely know who I am. Thank you for the trust and affection you have always shown me. I'm not doing this to defend myself. I have already endured these things many times, and the storm will pass. And again, I remember when this was originally brought up, and I remember he never clarified and came out and spoke about it. So that does seem to be true. But I'm making this clear so that some of you do not feel confused or suffer because of these and other accusations. But above all, I am doing it so that you will not try to harm Francis. Fair enough. He says, a big hug, Tucho. Again, not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but we're going with it. It's better than Tuco, right? Tuco Salamanca from Breaking Bad. All right. So anyways. All right. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, does that maybe necessarily mean that the book should have been written, or it was the most wise thing for him to have written, or it exonerates everything in there? Not necessarily, but it does help at least to give context to why he did these things, why he wrote it, what he was trying to accomplish by writing it. Okay, I can appreciate that. I think that that's fair. Not sure that I would have written this book. Personally, especially if I were a priest, not sure I would have done that, but at least again, it gives some context, and I think that we could say, okay, well, that does help a little bit, and so the situation isn't as bad as some have portrayed it to be, and I do recommend that you look at Pedro Gabriel's article that they linked to there. It's called "Lost in Translation: Archbishop Fernandez poem mistranslated as profanity," which again, I just find it hypocritical for this group to criticize the Archbishop allegedly for profanity when so many from this group defended profanity in the new Padre Pio movie. I just find that to be inconsistent, self-serving, hypocritical. But again, he notes it actually wasn't profanity. It wasn't the B word. It would actually be the word witch. And it doesn't even seem like it was something that he wrote. It looks like it was a poem that somebody else wrote and he included it there. Again, we push back on the wisdom of including some of these things. Sure. Yeah. Again, he does note, let's see here, try to find the spot where he mentions it. He does mention at some point, yeah, here it is. He says, quote, "This book was not written based on my own experience, but based on the lives of people who kiss," end quote. Right. And so, again, there were some people who are kind of thinking this is so odd for an archbishop to talk about these things. Is he speaking from experience? No, he explicitly says it wasn't. But is it a good look for an archbishop to write about, at the time he was a priest, is it a good look for a priest to write about these things when it's clearly not based on his own experience? I'm not so sure it's the best look, because it's going to maybe give some people that impression that maybe he's speaking from his own experience, and that doesn't seem to go well with priestly celibacy. And so it kind of sends potentially some mixed signals for people who haven't really looked into the issue and seen his caveat. Again, so is there wisdom in really doing this? I don't know. I think we can certainly question the wisdom behind initiating this. And it seems like he agrees that maybe that wasn't the best decision, and so it's no longer in publication. seems like he's kind of in agreement there. But maybe go and check out the article, very short, but again, written by Pedro Gabriel. I'll put links to this and also the one written by Where Peter Is, where you can go and look at these and kind of see for yourself. Again, I've been seeing it circulating online that he's been using profanity, or that he used profanity in the book, and a lot of people have used it to, ridicule him. And I think that it's it's important for them to see this as the context, and also see that they were using a mistranslation. And perhaps those people who have slandered the Archbishop on social media, what would be good is that they would come back on social media and publicly apologize for the slander and for misrepresenting him, and set the record straight. So whenever you bear false witness, whether intentional or not, if the action itself is bearing false witness, whenever you do that publicly, it's important to come back on social media and say, hey, I was wrong about that. Let me clear this person's name, instead of putting that out there, harming their reputation, and then just leaving it there. It's important to come back out and say, hey, I'm sorry, let me clear his name. Here's the truth. And so again, for anybody who shared on social media, maybe mistranslations and ridiculing the Archbishop for whatever faults he may have, this one, it was clear. This one was not a legitimate fault that we could attribute to him. So it's important to maybe exonerate him on that point. Again, that's not to say that he's never done anything wrong. It's not to exonerate anything he's ever written, but it is to show that, yeah, there's been a lot of people, misrepresenting things. And, there's nothing new. This is just another day. This is what people tend to do. They tend to, be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Interested in outrage. Somebody called it the other day, outrage culture. I thought that was an interesting term. We're starting to see an outrage culture in the Catholic Church, where people get very, riled up, and they're constantly trying to stir people up with things that will stir them up into a frenzy and outrage and make them angry and disgusted and hateful. And I don't know. I have more to say about that, but I'll do that on another show. Anyways, I hope y'all have enjoyed this one. If so, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Check me out, of course, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support me and the work that I'm doing here at Reason and Theology, and you'll get access to extra content. All right, I'll see you later. God bless. So Reason and Theology is growing as a channel. As a result, there's been a number of increases in production costs. So if you're benefiting from RNT, I ask that you consider supporting the channel. You can help out by contributing to the Help RNT Grow fundraiser on GoFundMe. You could also consider becoming a member on Patreon at patreon.com/Reason and Theology, or become a channel member right here on YouTube. With either of these options, Patreon or a YouTube member, you'll get extra access to patron-only content. You can also donate directly to RNT at PayPal if you prefer that option. And you can find links to all of these resources and ways to support RNT in the show description. God bless. Hey, pro-lifers, I want to remind you about realestateforlife.org. If you want to support the pro-life movement at no cost to you in the process of buying a home or selling a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, check out realestateforlife.org for more information. God bless. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. See you next time. God bless.